Peter B. Collins News and Comment. It's Tuesday, November 28th, 2017. Took a long Thanksgiving weekend for Family Patrol in Southern California. And I'm back to update you on news and comment. And I'm going to open with a surprise. Rare praise for the Washington Post. Now, even before Jeff Bezos took over the capital's leading newspaper, it had proven itself to be a reliable defender of the deep state, a protector of the Beltway insider interests, and it's guilty of many other sins. But today I take a break from my constant criticism of the Post to credit its editor, Marty Barron. He's the guy who won the Pulitzer at the Boston Globe for exposing the pedophile priests in the Archdiocese of Boston. And he deserves credit along with the reporting team that broke the Roy Moore story, and they avoided a trap that could have been created by Karl Rove. And I only say that because it has his his elements of design prominently displayed. But there was a trap laid by Jimmy OKeefe. James O'Keefe is this punk right-winger who runs what's called Project Veritas. Yes, Veritas is Latin for truth. I can remember that from my 8th grade Latin. And O'Keefe has been convicted of breaking and entering into a senator's office in New Orleans and a few other dark deeds over the years. He primarily produces selectively edited, hidden camera ambush video reports that advance the talking points of right-wing interests. And so after the Post reported on the first wave of accusations against Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore, the former Bible-thumping Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court, a woman approached one of the reporters and said, I want to tell you a story about Roy Moore. But she linked it to making sure that the Post would ensure that her story would make sure that Roy Moore dropped out of the Senate race. And her accusations were eyebrow-raising. She said that she had a sexual relationship only 25 years ago with Roy Moore when she was 14 going on 15. And she said that he knocked her up and helped her get an abortion. Now, this, of course, is kryptonite to the Bible thumpers who are blindly supporting Roy Moore despite these scurrilous charges against him. And to its credit, despite the efforts of this woman to sell her story to Post reporters, they didn't just publish it and run with it. They checked her out. They found out that it really didn't check out. They weren't sure her name was accurate. And there were other inconsistencies that surfaced in what she told Post reporters. And then on Monday, they went and staked out the offices of Project Veritas in suburban New York. And lo and behold, the woman that they knew as Jamie, what is her name here? It doesn't appear to be her real name, but Jamie T. Phillips, showed up, parked her car in the Project Veritas parking lot, and entered the building and stayed there for more than an hour. Then a fact-checker at the Post came up with a GoFundMe page in which a woman named Jamie Phillips was asking for money so she could move to New York to work for a great media organization that outs the left-wing media bias. And so, kudos to the Post. They avoided the trap, the kind of thing that Dan Rather got caught up in that cost him his career as the top anchorman at CBS News. That's when the trap was laid in records in Texas about George W. Bush's failure to complete his military service in lieu of being drafted into the war in Vietnam. And what they did was plant a document. And when Dan Rather used that document in a news story, they said, aha, that document is not credible. It's because the typeface was before the Selectric typewriter was introduced. And CBS News fired Dan Rather over what I think was a really shaky set of allegations. So I'm glad to see this because Jimmy O'Keefe deserves a comeuppance. Now, according to tax filings, Project Veritas raised $4.8 million in 2016 and employed 38 people with 92 volunteers. And their programs include training people on how to do undercover video ambush. It's quite an operation. And if you go to the Post website, you can see a video that was shot featuring Aaron Davis, one of the reporters on the team that exposed Roy Moore. And his showdown with James O'Keefe is priceless because the Post openly videotaped the encounter between Davis and O'Keefe while O'Keefe was videotaping it, and then he released one of his selectively edited versions of that conversation. And so the Post was able to really entrap him using his own techniques. And O'Keefe is blabbing on that the newspaper has a hidden agenda. Is the Washington Post ambushing me and confronting us because of what we're about to release? Is this a sort of anticipatory behavior ahead of what we're about to do? I believe that is projection on the part of Mr. O'Keefe. Meanwhile, I'm not able to cover every accusation of sexual harassment, sexual assault involving public or private figures. But I'll mention one today, and it's John Conyers. 85-plus years old, longest-serving member of the House of Representatives, Democrat, African-American from Detroit. A man who I've talked to on several occasions, and I have respected him. His views on the law and his seat on the Judiciary Committee have advanced many of my own views over the years. But Melanie Sloan is a woman who I know fairly well. She used to run CREW, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. She's now at a different nonprofit. I don't have the name of it in front of me. But Melanie worked for John Conyers back in the 90s, from 95 until I think about 98, where she was a lawyer, a counsel to the House Judiciary Committee. And she has gone public. She's not accusing him of, sexual assault. But she says that he was a brutal boss who yelled a lot, berated her, criticized her appearance. And she says on one occasion he summoned her to his Rayburn Building office, where she found him in his underwear. And Sloan says, quote, "I was pretty taken aback to see my boss half-dressed. I turned on my heel and I left." Now, she said that at the time she reported this to the leading Democrat, the House Minority Leader, Dick Gephardt, and that his staff did nothing. She complained to a Conyers superior of hers, I guess the chief of staff. But she said her complaints were not taken seriously. And after a Washington Post reporter contacted her, she said, "I decided to go on the record to make it easier for other people because people are afraid to come forward. So much about working in Washington is about loyalty, and you're supposed to shut up about these things." So I respect Melanie Sloan. American Oversight is the group that she is now involved with in Washington. And there is another accuser, a former deputy chief of staff, who said she kept quiet because she was 57 years old when he made a pass at her. And she needed to keep her job. She said, who's going to hire somebody when you're 57? And I can relate to that. But she said that there were 3 instances of inappropriate conduct. The worst was that during the Congressional Black Caucus, he invited her to share his suite at the Grand Hyatt Hotel in Washington. The other occasions included unwanted touching, but never crossed the line into any form of sexual activity. And the bottom line here is that if we're going to hold Roy Moore to a standard, if we're going to investigate Al Franken, I'm sorry to say, but I think John Conyers should step down. And I am still queasy about this process-free approach to outing people and then forcing them to give up their position. But politically, I don't think allowing him to stay is tenable. Yesterday was quite a day at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, where, as you may know, at the end of last week, the boss resigned. Richard Cordray, he's going to run for, I think, governor of Ohio. And Cordray read the law that created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It was shepherded into existence by now Senator Elizabeth Warren. And Obama, he whiffed on making her the first director, and that's why she ended up running for the Senate from Massachusetts. But what has occurred now is that with the resignation of Cordray, the Trump White House is trying to insert a hatchet man. Nick Mulvaney, who is currently the director of the Office of Budget, and they're saying that he has been named the interim director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. But the deputy director, who according to law becomes the acting director when there is a vacancy in the director's office, her name is Leandra English. She's not taking this quietly. So she filed a lawsuit in district court in Washington. But she drew the shortest straw because her case was assigned to Judge Timothy Kelly, a Trump appointee who was confirmed to the court only in September. So he's brand new there. Now, his background is he was an attorney with Chuck Grassley on the Senate Judiciary Committee. He's a Republican. But Kelly appears to be handling this fairly so far. He noted that lawyers for the president couldn't definitively say whether English was protected from losing her job, and he brought up an issue that the lawyers hadn't mentioned, whether Mulvaney can have two jobs at the same time. But he also said that he's essentially being asked by Miss English's lawyer to overrule the president's power to appoint a new director, and he said that's an extraordinary remedy, especially for a guy who's, just received his black robes. So the intent of Congress, the intent of Dodd and Frank comes into play here, as there were a lot of negotiations, some horse trading, about exactly how this new office was going to be structured. And they wanted to shield the director from political interference. So the intent is fairly clear, that Trump is exceeding his authority and trying to jump the shark here by imposing a wrecking crew member like Nick Mulvaney as the acting director. And we know Trump and Mulvaney are openly hostile to the mission of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. But it gets worse. I credit David Dayen at The Intercept for exposing that the guy who wrote the memo justifying this at the Office of Legal Counsel, his name is Stephen Engel. Well, up until he was appointed in August, he was one of two lead counsels for NDG Financial Corporation, a Canadian payday lender that was cited by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. In fact, they're still in court over a 9-year scheme to use its foreign status to offer U.S. customers predatory loans that are not consistent with state and federal law. They violate state and federal law. So this just shows the tawdry lack of concern even about the appearance of impropriety, much less the obvious conflict of interest that Stephen Engel has in authorizing the appointment of a guy who is dedicated to destroying the agency that is tangling with his clients, who offer the ugliest kind of usury currently known to humankind. And just for one more opinion, Lawrence H. Tribe, the respected law professor at Harvard, concludes that this effort on the part of Trump, quote, the president is going about it in a way that is plainly illegal. And the memo by Engel that I just referred to argues unconvincingly that the Federal Vacancies Reform Act of 1998 leaves the president with the option of installing Mulvaney. But it conflicts with the law that created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And that's where we go to court, to a judge appointed by Trump, to try to sort this out. Tribe's op-ed in today's Washington Post concludes, if Trump manages to put Mulvaney in the director's chair before a court can rule, it'll mean the president has usurped the prerogatives of Congress on the way to installing his own loyalist, to kneecap an agency created to protect Main Street from the excesses of giant banks and credit card companies. It would be an executive branch power grab, one that gives foul new meaning to the notion of what it means to, quote, occupy Wall Street. Nice pun there, Professor Tribe. Now, apparently, this whole dust-up, the struggle over Mulvaney and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, is on the top of Trump's addled mind. Because yesterday, in a totally unrelated event, where he was supposed to be honoring the World War II Navajo natives called Code Talkers, who we're told made important contributions to the war effort, he couldn't help himself. And he insulted not only the 90-year-old men that he was honoring, but he used a racial slur to attack Senator Warren without naming her, at least not calling her by her given name. He said, I just want to thank you because you're very, very special. You were here long before any of us were. Although we have a representative in Congress who, they say, was here a long time ago, they call her Pocahontas. Now, this is misguided on many levels. It's certainly the wrong time and place for Trump to use his insult of Senator Warren. But it's also deeply misguided because Pocahontas was a preteen who was kidnapped, held hostage, and raped by white invaders. And Trump, of course, is ignorant of those details. He just thinks it's a cute name to use to slam Elizabeth Warren in his little tweets. And Trump's defenders, including Rush Limbaugh and Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who went to the press room with extra war paint on. I'm sorry, I can't avoid mentioning that. And she just shows her ability to say the most disgusting things. Because she defended Trump. No, it's not inappropriate, not out of line, not an insult to those Native Americans he was honoring. And that what is really offensive is that Senator Warren, according to the right wing, has benefited from an ancient claim that she is 1/32nd Native American. And I can't sort all this out. We know that when she was recruited to Harvard, it showed up in her paperwork. It's not clear whether she promoted this or it was just in her CV. And it's fair to say that she hasn't completely explained it. But to attack Warren in this context, and to do it below the belt, just shows who Trump is. And we already know who he is. But it is astounding that people like Sanders can defend him and try to turn the tables and say that his need to use a racial slur in an insensitive context is the fault of Elizabeth Warren. And when you look at all of the credibility issues that Trump has, his over 1,000 lies, official lies, since he became president, the way he's refused to release his tax returns, he's tried to rewrite his own story, most recently that the Access Hollywood tape was overdubbed by somebody else. And so it just leaves us mouths agape. And meanwhile, the other target of Trump's public insults, the little rocket man, Kim Jongun, he's not being intimidated by Trump. Today, North Korea fired a ballistic missile for the first time in more than 2 months, defying demands from Trump to halt the weapons programs, defying the latest entreaty from an envoy from China. And the launch was confirmed by the Japanese Prime Minister's office. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And today is Giving Tuesday, so if you feel like this is your turn to step up and take out a subscription, I will not discourage you. So come on over to peterbcollins.com, just like Mona Kobus, Anna Gordonier, Kevin Beckley, and Jerry White. You can sign up for $5 a month and help support my work. I'd really appreciate it. At peterbcollins.com, click on the menu tab, pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber, and next thing you know, you're on the sign-up page, and I hope you will make a choice that fits your budget to support the work I do on a daily basis here. Oh, and speaking of Kim Jong-un and his rocket test, the state of Hawaii will start on Friday because it's the first day of the month. A statewide test of the Cold War-era early warning system designed to inform its residents of an impending nuclear attack. It's called the Attack Warning Tone, described as a wailing signal, will be heard for about 50 seconds on the first business day of every month as a test. And it's kind of sad that we have come to that, and that Trump is oblivious to the way that he is ignoring diplomacy in favor of escalating military threats that could back him into a corner or push him over a red line that he had not anticipated. And our diplomats at the State Department, according to former top diplomats Ryan Crocker and Nick Burns, the Foreign Service is being dismantled. And it is facing its perhaps greatest crisis. Because of budget cuts, a dismissive attitude toward diplomats and diplomacy, it threatens the Foreign Service, they say, just when we need it the most. And there is an 8% downsizing of the Foreign Service, and they demand that Congress exercise constitutional responsibilities to overrule the most dangerous aspects of the administration's plans. They note that Trump has nominated a former officer with only 8 years of experience to be the Director General of the Foreign Service. Now, this sounds pretty alarming. And recently on the Public TV NewsHour, I saw an interview with the president of the Foreign Service Association, Barbara Stevenson, and she offered similar extreme, alarming comments. But let's turn to a 24-year veteran of the State Department, Peter Van Buren, a great guy, a frequent contributor to this podcast, and he puts it into context, and I've linked to his article from the American Conservative in the show file for today's podcast. And he said, for example, when Barbara Stevenson announced that the Foreign Service Officer Corps has lost 60% of its career ambassadors since January, well, Van Buren points out that Stevenson doesn't mention that the 60% loss involves a decline from 5 people to 2. And of the 3 who retired, 2 of them are married to one another, suggesting that personal timing played a role in their decision to leave. He goes on, Stevenson is equally alarmed at Trump's government-wide hiring freeze affecting entry-level diplomats, but she fails to note the freeze won't touch a good 2/3 of new hires because they come from exempt fellowship programs. And hiring has been below the attrition rate since the Obama years anyway. So Van Buren says the real good news is that the dismantling is not happening. Overall, the number of senior diplomats is only 19 people less than at this time last year. But there is serious bad news. While a shortage of diplomats is not new under President Trump, the weakening of American diplomacy is real. And he notes the patronage assignment of many ambassadorships to big donors to the campaign that happens with every administration. And so I've linked to his article, and I encourage you to check it out, because he is concerned about the future of diplomacy, but not based on the same issues advanced by the critics of these moves. Now to the effort to reform. No. It's just a tax cut plan for corporations and wealthy individuals. And this is a big week in the battle in Washington. A lot of eyes are on John McCain. Today there was a committee vote, and all the Republicans saluted it, including Jeff Flake and Bob Corker. So the bill will go to the Senate floor. And there are legitimate complaints by Democrats. In both houses, they've been shut out of any kind of meaningful hearings, debate, or the possibility of amendments. But one thing that is in sharp relief is that Chuck Schumer is really kind of affirming something that I have pointed out weeks ago. And that is that the Democrats don't question the idea of tax cuts in themselves. They don't ask the question I do is, why the hell do we need these tax cuts? The economy is performing pretty well. And the idea that $1.5 trillion of cuts to corporations and wealthy individuals is going to improve employment in this country is pure bullshit. But Chuck Schumer is saying, well, come on. Democrats want to work on this too. There are a lot of areas we agree. We have to work to find a middle ground that's acceptable to both parties. And so keep in mind that the corporate Democrats aren't opposed to corporate tax cuts. They aren't opposed to bringing home the tax dodge money from Apple Computer and other companies that are waiting for a lower rate to repatriate their foreign profits. And it's still anybody's guess how this will all turn out. On the night before Thanksgiving, our longtime colleague Jason Leopold got a moment of praise from Rachel Maddow for his work as the FOIA activist. And it relates to information that Jason Leopold pried out of the federal government about Mike Flynn. And I want to be clear that while I continue to be a skeptic of the Trump-Russia narrative and that Russia hacked the DNC and gave that to WikiLeaks, it's pretty clear that the wide-ranging inquiry by Robert Mueller, the special counsel, is likely to ensnare Mike Flynn either by taking him to trial and winning a conviction or through a plea bargain. And while we have no evidence that this is going on, there is unrestrained speculation in Washington, stoked by Rachel Maddow and others, that Mike Flynn will be the subject of an announced plea deal or indictments any day now. That could be true, but nobody really knows. That doesn't stop the speculation. But Jason gets credit because a 3-year-old FOIA request that he filed after Mike Flynn was sacked by Obama as the director of the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, indicates that Mike Flynn is under a current criminal investigation for work that occurred while he was running the DIA. And that is interesting. It remains a bit speculative because we don't know what issues they are checking out. It could be as simple as tracking down how he made contact with the Turkish-related people who funded his $500,000 contract after he joined the Trump campaign, but before the election. So I give credit to Jason for that. But we still don't know what it all means about Mike Flynn. And by the way, I'm still trying to get a date with Jason to talk about some of his recent reports. Not the Mike Flynn report, but the one about the guy from CrowdStrike, Johnston, who Jason profiled without asking any questions about the Bill Binney alternate theorem about how the DNC was hacked, and a story that I consider to be beneath Jason, the one about how Chase established that there were some wire transfers to Russian embassies from Moscow to pay for costs related to the 2016 election. Most likely the election in the Russian Duma, not anything to do with Trump or the United States. Pope Francis has popped into Myanmar, the former Burma, where the human rights issues related to the displacement of the Rohingya, the ethnic cleansing of this Muslim minority by the Buddhist majority, has attracted concern from around the globe. And Francis, unfortunately, in the somewhat in the vein of Pope Pius XII during World War II, he has had to yield to political realities in Myanmar. And so he's not using the word Rohingya, which is considered highly polarized in Myanmar, because the majority Buddhists and the military leaders consider them people who don't belong in the former Burma. They call them Bengalis. And the military, has led the ethnic cleansing of these minorities and pushed them into neighboring Bangladesh. But the Pope appeared today with the nominal leader, which doesn't control the army, Aung San Suu Kyi, and she acknowledged that the situation in Rakhine State has most strongly captured the attention of the world. But the Pope made very bland, broad comments about the need to respect all people and that sort of thing. And this is really sad because Francis is known for blurting out, telling it like it is. And here he is censoring himself, and I'm sorry to see that. In Bali, an island that I have visited twice and I really enjoy, I was there 2 years ago, and one morning we took a bike ride down the hills of Mount Agung. And in recent days, Mount Agung has begun to erupt. It is a volcano that last spewed in 1963 when 1,100 people were killed. And the international airport in Denpasar was closed yesterday, maybe closed today, because of the volcanic ash that can foul jet engines and cause serious problems. So Bali is evacuating a 6-mile zone near Mount Agung, and we'll be watching with interest. And finally today, the Koch brothers are passive investors in a deal to sell Time magazine and Fortune and the related publications to the Meredith Corporation, which is a publisher. They used to be a broadcaster, and once upon a time I was offered a job at the Meredith radio station in Syracuse, and I'm really happy I didn't go there. At any rate, David and Charles Koch are kicking in about $650 million to help the takeover of the remnants of the Time Life publishing empire. Life was put to bed a few years ago, so it now includes Time, People, Fortune, and Sports Illustrated. And since Fortune only writes positive stories about the titans of American industry, I guess the Kochs were mostly interested in Time. But as Jane Mayer, the New Yorker writer and the author of Dark Money, is quoted as saying, "The Kochs have assured the public they have zero interest in influencing news coverage through their financial stake in the Time Incorporated deal. But they also have assured the public in the past that they had nothing to do with the rise of the Tea Party, that they have attached no strings to the academic programs they fund, and that they only act out of selfless altruism rather than self-interest when they pour money into politics, all of which have proven dubious." And then she said, relentlessly punning, "Time will tell." Thanks for joining me for my daily news and comment podcast. It's available free, and it's available on YouTube. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.